I'm Leonid Todorov. I represent the RIGF NCC. So our panelists are Andrey Vorobyev, .Moskva, Irina Danelia, .ДЕТИ, Yury Kargapolov. He's the only one in this company who does not report to the registrar, to a registrar. This is an internationalized domain, .UKR, Ukraine, and Fedor Smirnov, .Rus, and Almaz Valiullin, who represents new .Tatar. We will talk about new solutions, new domains. We don't have Veni Markovski with us, who represents ICANN. Maybe he's late from lunch. So let me start with a short introduction about how the situation sort of looks like to open the door for a discussion. Sergey, could you please? Yes, thank you. So if we will look at the world map in terms of emergence of new top-level domains, we will see that the North America will have a big population density. Europe will be quite well represented. India and China, yes, quite a good representation. But the former Soviet Union will be less densely populated, much less densely. So the few representatives of the community of registrars of new TLDs have joined us here. It's a very good thing. Of course, I'd like to hear what Veni Markovski has to say about this, but what I'd like to point out is that the domains which are already delegated and which already started their business are not very thriving. If you look at the statistics of those new domains, you will see that the top 10 delegated new TLDs, they're not very big. The largest .guru has about 47,000 domain names, and the 10th one has about 10,000 domain names. And when I looked at their growth rate, I found out that their growth rate in terms of second-tier domains is about just 200 domain names per day. So they are, at least they're not exploding. Let's put it like this. We will put it on the table, but since I had to actually say something for Veni Markovski, now I'd like to pass the floor to our colleagues to talk about the life that their new domains, their new domains are living today. Well, I think it would be more logical to start with Irina, because her domain .deti has only today just been delegated this domain from ICANN. Moscow and Moskva domains are still in the phase of well, waiting time. I think in the end of May, beginning of June at the latest, we will start land rush for these Moscow domains. I will talk not just about the domains that have been already applied, but about the domains that might have been or could have been. No, please, no subjunctive mood here. Let's talk about the business. Well, RU Center, which was the sort of founding father of Moscow, analyzed the readiness of other regions of Russia to get their own geographical domains. Well, you were right about the largest new domain, .guru, 47,000 names, but The second largest is .Berlin, and it already has 45,000 names. Geographical domains, there are about 60 of them, have their own niche. They have their own business and a different registration statistic and the way to look at it. A lot of our regions are more or less ready to get the domains, not just city domains, .Baikal, .Siberia. Crimea, if they belong to Russia at that point, could have applied for the .Crimea, and so on. However, this is a costly enterprise, and the only application process costs about $185,000. Well, it makes it costly. The only project which people were ready to finance is the regional project for Yakutia, .Saha. Alrosa, the diamond company, was ready to co-finance it, but there was no agreement between the businessmen and the government. So people are ready, but people are not yet ready to pay for it. However, as the representative of RU Center, I can tell you that we have very many applications for the land rush in .DETI and .shop and .ru, so people have applied for that, less Moscow and Moscow. All right, Irina, the floor to you. What is .DETI is experiencing right now? Well, as an existing domain, as an already existing domain, I think we have a right to join the chorus of congratulations. I think now that RUNET is already a grown-up person, 20 years, we can give RUNET the best gift in the world, which is children, of course, which Russian DETI is the English for children. At noon, we have opened the space for applications. On the 26th of February, the domain was opened in the root space of ICANN. There will be 3 stages. There will be 3 stages to the registration of second-level domains. As to our contractual obligations, we give the first land rush opportunity to those trademarks that have already been registered by the Trademark Clearinghouse. The second priority in the land rush is given to registered and protected trademarks in the Russian Federation, even if they are not registered in the Trademark Clearinghouse. And the third stage, maybe even the most interesting stage, is the stage in which we invite all the newspapers, magazines, radio networks, and any internet projects and websites to join us if they have some children topics, if they provide goods and services for children, or if they share our services and visions. And after that, the real land rush will start for all the people. The only restriction there, but a very stringent restriction, would be that the owner of the applicant domain would have to share our vision and values. Well, as far as I understand, you have a lot of applications already. Yury, this is not a discrimination of Ukraine in this forum, but to keep up with the logic of events, I'd like to ask Fyodor first, then Almaz, and then we will transfer it to you. Okay, I accept this logic. Well, it's good to see that people accept your logic. All right, Fyodor, what can you say about your domain? Well, I'd like to say a couple of words about the positioning of our domain first. Well, I was preparing this question for all of us. Okay. This is going to be the next question. Okay, the update. December last year, ICANN and Ruski Imena, the administrator of .rus, signed an agreement. Then we signed memoranda of understanding with all ICANN certified registrars in the Russian zone. Right now we are at a stage of legal negotiations between various registrars, and after that we will be ready to announce the final rule. We will be ready to accredit registrars, and then we will have the sunrise date, because this is what interests people mostly. Almaz. Well, if I'm not allowed to talk about the mission of our domain now, we are approaching the agreement with ICANN. Technicheski Center Internet, to whom we are going to outsource the technological part of the job, is going to do that. In the end of summer, we plan, our target is to start the sunrise in the end of summer for trademarks and the first priority of the land rush. We have an ethnic holiday on the 30th of August, so I think we will be able to start that. All right. And now, .ukr. So Yury, briefly, if you can, talk to us about the update on your domain. Ukr is the oldest boy on this gang. We started our registration process on the 20th of August last year. We were delegated on the 28th of February, and as far as I understand from our colleagues, they are passing the same milestones on the rules and on the sunrise period. So, based on what I heard. We, of course, introduced the sunrise period, and it was phased into 5 stages. We have identified 16 categories, starting from the government institutions all the way through to people who were a prominent part of the Ukrainian history and so on. A special phase was dedicated to trademarks, to registered copyright names, and so on and so forth. We work in 2 languages, in Ukrainian and Russian. At first, we had a lot of applicants, really. If you look at the proportion between .rf and .ukr, until the end of January, our proportion was almost the same. Unfortunately, because of the circumstances you know about, the economic situation in Ukraine is not very favorable, which of course affected our business as well. As of the 4th of April, we started we started absolutely open registration, even if they don't have a trademark. I will give you just one example. We have two big bus companies in Ukraine, Geocell and Autolux. Geocell had their name registered during the sunrise period, and the other did not register in time, so a private person grabbed their domain during the go-live period, which we currently have. And Intel.Ukr, for example, they have sort of failed to register their domain in time. And in order to manage such disputes, we have gone a little further to create a pre-judicial dispute settlement commission. We live in a sort of special situation because we need to understand who affects the Ukrainian economy in which way. So the commission is already up and running. The commission is already in place, and it has under its auspices an expert board, and the experts will have to provide their legal opinion on the disputed registrations or registrations that were not done in good faith, and so on and so on. So we have created the toolkit that will be able to manage the interests of all stakeholders. So this makes .ukr a truly multi-stakeholder domain. Okay, this brings me to the second question, which some people have already put on the table. We all know that a lot of CC-TLDs are already in place, and GTLDs, generic TLDs, they are already in place. The question is, what is the mission of this or that domain? And what is your vision of what your domain is for and what your domain is supposed to do? Well, even though we have a twin domain, Moskva and Moscow, the positioning of these two domain names is different. City domains, I think it's quite understandable why they are created. First of all, they are created for the organizations and citizens. Citizens of the cities. Well, we have some examples in the global history. The Laos domain name was bought by Las Vegas and was .la and was used for the city. So we do understand how it's going to work, more or less. Market-specific domains or community-specific domains, well, that is a little bit less clear. Moskva, the Cyrillic domain, is created for the citizens of Moscow and Russian-speaking guests of Moscow. There will be .shkola.moskva or .poliklinika.moskva, so school Moscow or polyclinic Moscow. This will protect the users from phishing, and they will understand that it is exactly their website, the website of the entity that has a license, and so on and so forth. .Moscow, the Latin script domain, is a little bit more liberal because we will be targeting international tourists who are English-speaking, and the catalogs of theaters, museums, and hotels, they will be placed there in the first place. Of course, our future target audience is small and medium business. That doesn't mean that large businesses are not going to join. They are going to join, but they are few and far between, so we don't think they're going to make a big audience. But small and medium businesses, they are city-bound, and therefore we expect them. Of course, the situation will be more beneficial to people who have taken the trouble to protect their names in the special repository. Of course, this is a troublesome business. We last week had a special forum together with Deloitte on intellectual rights, and after his speech, a lot of people asked questions which demonstrated that even specialists do not understand very much how this repository works. And statistics is the same everywhere. In Berlin, I think only 90 trademarks were registered during the sunrise period. So we will give priority to the entities that are registered in Moscow and the Moscow region. I have a question to you. I will ask you short questions, each of you. When we talk about .Berlin, their big success in the beginning stage, do you think that the model of .Berlin can be transplanted to Moscow-Moskva? So, which is closer to .Berlin? Maybe it's closer to .rf. Moscow-Moscow is something in between .Berlin and .rf. We have different rules, and we have rather specific features. So if you look at all the rules of the Russian domain zones, you will see that a lot of rules have been inherited from .rf. We could criticize them, but in the .rf, the sunrise period was extended and procrastinated, additional categories were added, and a lot of fraudsters took their advantage of that. But after that, the experience was taken and the lessons were learned. We only, for example, included in the sunrise period only the trademarks that had been registered before opening. And a lot of people tried to push through their words like porn, which is the Russian acronym for consumer society, but we actually learned our lesson and created mechanisms not to let that happen. All right, what about the children then? Well, when we started the description of the project and we formulated the mission of our domain, we formulated it in the following way. Our mission is to facilitate the quality of the internet experience for children and adolescents. It's not only about the domain. Our current vision of our project is broader. To create a domain is a tool. Our vision is to create internet for children, which is interesting to and comfortable for the usage of children. There is literature for grown-ups, there is cinema for grown-ups and literature and cinema for children. Now our internet has grown up. There is some children's internet in it, but a tiny, tiny fraction. A couple of years ago, we analyzed this, and it turned out that if you take the share of children as the internet audience, and if you take the share of websites dedicated to children, the proportion is devastating. So there are very, very, very few websites for children. So our task and our mission is to facilitate the growth and development of children's internet in the country. It's going to be difficult because, you know, it's more difficult to write books or make movies for children, because children are more sensitive than grown-ups. Maybe they don't have as much blinds and roadblocks in their mind as grown-ups. So to us, this is a big social undertaking. We are confident that we will not lose money, but we are not bent on making as much money as possible. This is a project to make sure that our children have a comfortable and safe environment online. And this is a Cyrillic domain, so it will take only domain names in Cyrillic script. So this makes us very much oriented on Russophones, Russia, Ukraine, Moldova, Azerbaijan, wherever, America, Canada, but of course it will be a Russophone domain. So it's going to be a Cyrillic sandbox for children. Now let me ask Fyodor to talk about his domain. Well, .rus is also a Cyrillic domain, and we see that that mostly new GTLD applications have been made in Russian. So to us, this is a key thing. We don't want to be yet another Cyrillic domain. The vision of the project is to unite Russophone internet users independently of the geographic place where they're based. Well, first of all, we are a Cyrillic domain, which makes it more comfortable and convenient for people who speak Russian. Secondly, we are a transborder domain, which means that we do not want to associate ourselves with a territory. We want to associate ourselves with a mindset, which of course will affect the marketing strategy and the promotion of the domain. Of course, we are aware that Russophones are mostly Russians based in Russia, and Russia is the basic market for us. But of course, we are also interested in the markets of countries where Russian language is widely spoken: Belarus, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and other countries. In many countries, Russian-speaking diasporas, Russophone diasporas, are quite strong. They're quite numerous, and they want to associate themselves with the Russian language and Russian culture. What's a marker or an identifier to us is self-identification or mindset. It is not something you can write in a passport. It is the internal feeling of affiliation with the Russian culture or Russian language. We are deeply oriented at community values. And this is the way we formulated and articulated our rules. We have been created for the community, and we will be developing for this Russophone community. Well, I do understand this. Almaz, I understand that Fyodor has stolen a lot of things from you, but what can you say about this? Yes, our mission is quite similar. We are also oriented on the cultural Tatar community. Either people are ethnic Tatars or associate themselves with the Tatar community. Most Tatars, they live outside of Tatarstan, other regions of the Russian Federation, the Crimea, and other countries. We are a Latin script domain. In Russia, a lot of Tatars use Cyrillic script, but outside Russia, a lot of Tatars use Latin script, therefore we decided to be Latin script as well. We are a little bit like a geographical domain, not CCTLD, but RCTLD, because we can't help to be not to be associated with Tatarstan. And that means that anyone who provides services for the Tatars, for the world Tatars, or for Tatarstan, will be our target audience. But of course, we will not sacrifice quality for the sake of quantity. Our rules will be rather stringent before we open the domain for registrations. I don't know whether it keeps with our topic or not, but I think the rules of all these smaller domains, they give the internet they do give the internet an option to grow up, because when you have 3 shelves for your books, you can throw all the books in the same shelf. However, if you suddenly have a lot of shelves for all the sorts of books, it's a bad idea not to use them. Of course, for example, adult content should be driven in a special bookcase. The one thing that actually precludes a lot of people from joining the process is the cost of application by ICANN. So if ICANN could negotiate a little bit smaller prices for applications and for cost of ownership, that would be a good idea, because a lot more domains would actually be oriented at their own target audiences. Well, I think the .guru domain is a good example, because everyone wants to feel like a guru. I think it's important because the Tatars are second only to Russians in terms of numbers in the Russian Federation. So we're talking about a large number of people, even though they live inside Russia. Now let's turn to Ukraine. Can we see the shoots of a new Cyrillic plant overshadowed by .rf? Well, of course there are such shoots. I would approach this with one notion. We have a truly global market, even though it is a segmented market. So my segmentation is a little bit different to new GTLDs. All the domains represent a single market. We are an interrelated market, and I think we will all come to the same thing. Our applicants will be from various ethnic groups, language groups, states, and so on. There will be no borders that will stand between the registrants and the applicants. And another important thing, like it or not, we are approaching true convergence. And it is exactly where domain names and domain spaces will play an important role. Because identifiers play a key role in any global telecommunications. This was brought to the table, but very tangentially during the plenary session. So we have to create rules that would be integrated, and that would make sure that the whole domain space is ready for the future convergence. Maybe I was a little bit unclear, but in an offline discussion I think I will be able to articulate myself more clearly. All right, I think we have all understood this. Evgeny has joined us now, so I think I will ask you. First of all, could you respond to the last comment by Yury? And several times during this discussion we have mentioned several factors, the barriers, including the financial barriers that prevent the emergence of new domains. Well, the $185,000, the amount that that is required by ICANN is a sizable amount, and I think you can see how many applicants come from developed countries and how many applicants come from developing countries, including Africa and South America. That is the one side of the story. And another side of the story is that ICANN had a special program of supporting candidates who are financially strained. This is also important to remember. However, very few organizations asked, actually, ICANN how they make use of this program. When we make conclusions and findings after the first part of the program is complete, maybe people will make their conclusions about how much it's going to cost in the second wave of registering new domains. I will not talk about any information about how it's going to cost, because I do not want to affect the current registrations. Just a week ago, I said how many applicants we've got, and now this information is already outdated. Of course, the money that ICANN gets from the applicants will be spent and reinvested only with the true consent and consensus of the entire internet community. So, on the one hand, yes, it's a sizable amount of money that we require. On the other hand, it is a reasonable amount of money considering the first wave and the amount of organizational work that that's required. When we keep on, this can be decreased. Well, as to the $3 million endowment, which was allocated to sort of financially strained applicants, it was strange to me that a lot of people just didn't know anything about that endowment. So maybe there was some technical misunderstanding on this. What I'd like to ask is this. 10 domains are already in place and have several thousands of domain names registered onto them. Probably this is not the result that we have all expected. 46.8 thousand domain names in .guru, 45,000 in .berlin. They all demonstrate that there is no big boom around this project. So what do you think? What do you think the problem is? Well, I do agree that there is a problem. I don't know why. I don't know the reason for it. Maybe, just maybe, the business case for some domain zones just doesn't envision a big number of domain names. When .rf applied for registration, people thought that it will get 100,000 names in the end of the first year. In fact, they got the 100,000 names in the end of the third hour. And no one expected 800,000. So, out of the thousands of applications that are in the process now, we don't know whether some domains will become really big and some domains will become really high in terms of quality. For instance, .apple will place all its communication there. I don't know. Well, yes, probably all the marketing gurus will have to change their domains. As I prepared for this panel, I looked at what the market practitioners think. I went to Circle ID, a blog, and found there 4 key parameters of success of new GTLDs. So what are these key success factors: community, location, generic keywords. Well, they're not that important to us, probably. And primarily, whether they can compete with .com. So my question is, how do these four factors, starting with community, of course, will play out in your particular domains? Well, first of all, I'd like to make a step back to the statistics. Veni has said that no one expected 100,000 domain names, but in fact, we actually had 135 pre-applications, and right now we have more than so all the new GTLDs have less than 50,000 applications right now. We started taking the applications on the 30th of September last year. So the main pickup started from our announcement. So we picked up to 20,000 applications in the first 2 weeks, and now it has grown to under 50,000. But that doesn't mean our new domains are absolutely unnecessary. They are necessary, and I think it will be easier for people to select their names. Of course, domain investors or cyber squatters, as they used to be called, either them or bona fide users have selected all the good names from the dictionary, and it's really hard to find a good name in .ru or in .rf. Either you have to use two words, or you have to use various commas and additional characters and so on. However, with going Cyrillic, we can change the words, the ending of the word, and you can use a much broader spectrum of domain names for individual or corporate marketing. They can not only register a visible domain, but they can also express themselves. So I don't think people will rush to register, but people will think before they register. Let's get back to Moscow. Well, geographically speaking, Moscow is very clear. I mean, when you said, when you talked about .Moscow and when you said it would be targeting tourists, I think it's a small community. Maybe I misunderstood you, and maybe each tourist coming to Moscow and inspired by Moscow could register their own domain name in Moscow. Well, that would be a very idyllic picture. .rf was successful because it was supported by the then president, Dmitry Medvedev. Medvedev promoted this domain on the central TV, so he was our biggest advertiser. And the success of .Moscow would also be dependent on the behavior of the Moscow city government. Right now, all the billboards for Moscow city services say something.msk.ru. If they change it for .Moscow, this will be a trigger, and the community will shape around this. Okay, administrative resource again. Thank you very much. Irina, you said that there are children, and their parents, their teachers are your target audience. So all the education environment, businesses, and so on. What should be the role of this community in developing the domain .deti? And do you think this domain can really scale out across Russia? So we have seen that Moscow accounts for 20% of registered domain names, while Chukotka just 500. So how can we make the children's domain a really, truly national domain? Well, you know, the domain geography is very much the same as internet access geography. When we started on the internet, Moscow was at first 70% of the Russian internet, then half the Russian internet, then 40% of the Russian internet, and so on, in terms of the number of the active users. So the trend on domains is going to be the same. This is a retarding wave, but the wave behaves in the same way. So I think following Moscow, other cities and towns, especially as towns and villages bridge the digital gap, which we've talked about earlier today. So following Moscow, they will register also in our domain. Secondly, we don't have any geographical restrictions. We say, if you want to talk to children in Russian, you're welcome. So marketing is going to be very clear and very focused, because it gives you a very clear understanding who the target audience is. So whoever creates such a clear-cut domain, .hotel, .shop, and so on and so forth, they can't be anything but successful, because the first thing they do, they identify the business in a very focused way. Well, I'm not asking you how you're going to compete with .com. Well, we are not going to do. So this is truly a multi-stakeholder environment where everything is generated in a bottom-up way. Businesses and civil society, households, families, communities, and so on. Now I'd like to ask a question to the other three domain participants, because I think there is a lot of similarity among them in one point. Even though all of you are different, you all have a core of your community inside your country or region, and a big, sizable potential audience abroad. So the question to you is, how are you going to mobilize that abroad community? And how do you think to make sure that this community contributes to the development of the domain? So we'll start with Fyodor, and then Almaz and Yury. So talking about the 4 points taken from Circle ID, we cannot compete with .com, but we can compete with .ru. So location gives us 300 million Russophones. These are people who associate themselves with the Russian language and therefore with the Russian values. The core of the audience is, of course, in Russia, but a sizable amount live abroad in other countries. This community is far from homogeneous, and therefore you cannot sort of manage it in a straightforward way. Some users, content-generating users, have their own interests. Non-government institutions, state and non-state institutions seeking to promote Russian language and culture, commercial companies, everyone has their own interests. And our mission is to coordinate all those interests during sunrise, during pre-registration, and so on and so forth. I'll give you several examples. For instance, it's very important to us to keep the balance between being a commercial project and imposing the values of this community. It is a bona fide usage policy which must help us keep this balancing act between values and commercial value. It should be a well thought of sunrise period, because no one just copies the international standard which gives priority during sunrise only to the International Trademark Clearinghouse protected trademarks, because there are very few Cyrillic trademarks there. So we have to invent our own categories for the sunrise period. But in any case, we will have to consider the ethnic and national specificities and the local interests. We have also plans to create third-level domains that will be given for free because of their being social projects. As to our benchmark, it is not .com, as I said. It's the .ru. We have seen that in offline marketing, where you've got to read and pronounce names, a lot of companies, if they don't have an account in .rf, they have to go a little bit dual, because they've got their domain in .ru and it's in Latin script, but they've got all their communications in Cyrillic. So we will give them an additional opportunity to use a new address as a full-fledged name, the brand. Last but not least, one cannot say that new GTLDs have too few domain names registered. It's a different understanding of what is enough and how fast is enough. Because when we look at the various structures that came into place after the new DGLD program started, they are absolutely unorthodox compared to what had become orthodox on the internet. With .rf, there was a lot of latent demand, there was a lot of administrative resource, and this project was doomed to success. With .rus, we cannot expect exponential growth, and I would say that the number of projects that experience exponential growth would be in the single digits. All right. I think in Brighton Beach people will be happy to create their own domains. Almaz, what can you say? We are very closely oriented on the community, and the community, as represented by the Congress of Tatars, by the Tatarstan Chamber of Commerce, supported our application to ICANN, and we count on their future support. We will create a supervisory board which will include the representatives of all multi-stakeholders. This is the World Tatar Congress, the Tatarstan government, the Chamber of Commerce of Tatarstan. The government of Tatarstan is an important driver of the project and supports us greatly. You invoked the World Tatar Congress. Maybe people don't know this, but a Tatar diaspora outside Russia is quite sizable. Do you have any clear-cut feedback on that? Well, the global Tatars have given us their feedback through the World Congress. Tatarstan is trying to strengthen ties with Tatars in all countries of the world. Crimea is but one example of how we're trying to do that. So we invoke the spirit of Tatardom as a cultural realm. Of course, in terms of figures, we're not as sizable as someone else. We have about 5.5 million people globally, not 300 million people as Russians. But for our domain, this is quite a good audience, and we are pretty much restricted by the demand that comes from this audience. So we cannot compare quantities, therefore we must compare qualities, whether a domain is doing things right. I will agree with my colleague from .ukr that we do not would not want to engage in this tug of war. We want all the .com users in our domain. No, I think we need to be staying focused on our audience and cater to our audience. The internet must not be a confrontational space, I think. Well, Yury, that brings me to the second question. Canada, Australia, and other countries are home to very, very sizable Ukrainian diasporas. Do you hope that this audience will become yours? And if yes, then how are you going to do that? Because even in Canada, they don't write Cyrillic anymore. Well, first of all, you've got to remember that 48 million of Ukrainians live in Ukraine. And another 48 to 50 million Ukrainians live outside Ukraine across the world. So .ukr has a big potential. Here we're talking about some chemistry, some mind chemistry. The amount of applicants that we have expected was about 40,000 names. There are certain reasons why we think we have failed to pick up this number of registrations in the first days. Maybe the biggest reason is the economy, of course. As to the distribution and promotion of this domain abroad, we're looking at the marketing policies and promotion policies, which will have to be flexible because we can see that economics and politics may interfere. So, as people say in Odessa, which is still part of Ukraine, we will remain to see. A small remark here about the 4 key success factors. In our case, there is no competition with .com, there is competition with .ua, but I would actually introduce the 5th success factor, the underlying state of economy, because for a CCTLD, this is of utter importance. Our colleagues from Hostmaster made a special demonstration. They introduced Cyrillic symbols in our code page, and in 2 months they registered 25,000 domains. However, this was not very convenient, because that was Cyrillic.Latin, but it demonstrated the potential, even though the domain name was still Latin. And another important success factors for the entire domain market, not individual domains, is integration, is integration of internet services with telecommunication services. We're not going to live in an internet world. We're going to live in a converged internet to telecoms world. So in a few years, in just a few years, this market is going to be absolutely different. Different functions and different marketing policies for domain names. I think Veni has a comment, and I also have another point to make. I have 20 copies of the Boston Consulting Group report with me, and I will leave them here. The Boston Consulting Group is exactly talking about the economics and the development of the internet and how internet underlies the economic development of each country. It is an independent report, even though sponsored by ICANN, and it makes what Yury has just said so important. If e-commerce is in place, if electronic services are in place, then the domain zone will be successful. Just think about where .com was 15 years ago. It was a pretty small zone. Now it has skyrocketed. So it has skyrocketed exactly because of the development in underlying economy. You can see that in all countries. Internet may be easily accessible, but if there is no e-commerce and if people don't have any commercial reason to register domain names, they just don't. Well, Andrey Kolesnikov's idea is a little bit different. I wasn't present at the news conference today, but Andrey, from what I know about him, says that the explosive growth of .ru came exactly back in 1996, when there was an economic meltdown, and for many people, online business became the only tool to come to an arm's length to their consumers. Yury put a very important issue on the table, and I'd like to transform it into my last question. ICANN says in its documents, and we all say at all forums, that new domains are a tool to spurn innovations across the globe. It is a tool of innovation. So, my question to you is such. What is it exactly that has made your domain innovative enough on the internet? Well, first of all, we are creating the online territory of Moscow. Not just Moscow, but people who associate themselves with Moscow, people who provide services for Moscow, and so on and so forth. Of course, it depends on the point of view whether to consider this innovative. Territorial branding, virtual branding, and so on. Maybe this is the only innovative thing that we can contribute. As Yury said, we will also make new services that will assist new entities and individuals to do marketing in a new way. The protection of a domain name and trademark. When you think of your positioning, you have to think about your domain name, and when you register your domain name, that affects your future positioning, whether you like it or not. This is the tomorrow that we are looking at already. New services are still in the making, still in their infancy. In other countries where there is already a critical mass of domain names registered, they are already in place. We don't have a lot of Cyrillic domain names there, but when we have the infrastructure in place, when we have the critical mass of consumers, we will see more and more organizations who provide services. And the costs of those services will be much less than today. Irina, can you add something? Well, let's look at this from a different angle. And maybe I will ask my colleague to support me in what I'm going to say, because children's internet is not so much innovative in terms of technology. The innovation is going to come from a different place. It will force the owners of websites look from a different angle on what they're going to do. Search, communication tools, navigation, they're all different for children. So this is a great example of multi-stakeholderism and true bottom-up initiative. We have been considering an initiative to consider a charter of children's internet, and I'd like to ask my colleague to talk about this. Oleg has been doing this for quite some time already. Oleg is a member of the board of our fund. I'm Oleg Ulyansky. I'm chairman of the RIGF Commission for Children's Internet, and I'm head of ДЕТИ, the largest children's internet portal. Our target audience is exactly the child audience, and we have a vested interest in creating this new ДЕТИ domain zone, because our belief is that it will develop and exist and thrive only if website owners and parents and everyone else will only understand that this is a safe environment. This safe environment must be safely regulated, and this brought us to the idea of a charter. This is a universal agreement that says what must be on children's internet and, importantly, what must not be on the children's internet. Whether it is a commercial aspect or social aspect or whatever aspect of what's going to be there. So if you have signed this charter, if you are admitted in this domain zone, everyone knows that children under 12, for instance, can freely use these websites, because all the websites have committed to certain restrictions and limitations, and they honored those commitments. They have signed it themselves based on the understanding that they are catering to a very, very, very special audience. There are quite a few such limitations in Russian laws already, but we need to bring them together in one document, and maybe the self-limitation must be even more stringent than legal limitation, because legal people are not aware of the interactive nature of the internet very often. So we are working already on this with professional teachers, with professional lawyers, and in the coming months we hope that a draft will be available for public discussion. Thank you. Thanks. Well, I think our colleagues have been eloquent enough. Nonetheless, Fyodor, Almaz, and Yury, if you have anything to add, feel free. Talking about innovations again, I don't think we can add anything innovative technologically, but we can give a new perspective to things. When we say RUNET, there is some certain there is a certain understanding, and we want to change that understanding. People say that RUNET is about .ru, but a lot of Russian websites they are .com or .something. So we should not think that citizenship or domain zone or whatever must restrict us. We need to unite on the basis of self-identification and self-affiliation. So I think that what we're going to add is a platform to promote Russian culture and Russian language in the world and unite people on a new way. Almaz? Well, I think people have stolen everything from what I wanted to say. I think I need to reiterate what's been said during the plenary session. We don't want to play a zero-sum game on the existing market. We want to create a new market, a new brand which people would be attracted to associate themselves with. Politically, it's also important that we are not competing with .ru. We are going to be a cultural domain. The government of Tatarstan is not going to migrate to .tatar. It will remain on .ru. We will be oriented at cultural domain names. Businesses will also be welcome, but business and culture is something that we're going to restrict ourselves with. So we will not start this tug-of-war on the Russian internet. Comparing ourselves to .com, in .com you feel the same as one in a crowd. Here you're one in a company. We will ask all the questions afterwards. Yury, you will be the last to speak. Do you have anything to add to what's been said already? Well, I'll try to add. I represent a country code domain. We are not a generic domain. So, innovatively, I think we have already implemented a lot of managerial innovations in the first place. People complained to criminal courts against us, people defamated us because we tried to introduce real multi-stakeholderism in ACC-TLD. So this is an experience that very, very, very few people have. Secondly, as we had to address all these things and creating a normally adequately managed internet domain, we had to be flexible about technological innovations. And for the fourth time, I will say that because it is of paramount importance to us, we need to understand the future services that tomorrow will converge with the domain names. Electronic communication is the biggest innovation that we are going to contribute. And before passing the floor to Veni, I would just like to sum up for what's been said. So the innovative potential of the existing and future domains looks to be the following: new marketing strategies, new multi-stakeholderism toolkit and institutions, new services, new spaces, and a cultural brand as a new way of organizing communities around your brands. And I'm very happy to hear all that, because I very recently read a big paper by the Sloan School of Management from the MIT, and the authors there say that all the new services, spaces, and blah, blah, blah must be centered around one goal. Not to satisfy a customer, but to delight a customer. And I think it is important that all our guests are people with a mission. So, Veni, what can you say about ICANN position of this? I know that there are a lot of questions, so I will be very, very quick and brief. ICANN's position is, well, ICANN did not invent new domains. They were invented by people who are aware of a business opportunity or of a cultural opportunity. We are just an enabler, and this is exactly the role that we would like to take on. If you have a question, please use the microphone. Do we have questions from the online world? Alexei? This is a question from people who watch our broadcast. A question from Anton. Do you think Cyrillic email is going to be in demand, and do you think it is a necessary thing? Well, Cyrillic email, the absence of Cyrillic email is the main roadblock in the way of .rf, and I think .ukr would be benefit from that. So these domains will be secondary without email. Well, we have found a way to start Cyrillic email even tomorrow. It's really hard to do this. I can share this with you, but I think even tomorrow we can implement this. Irina, what do you think about that? Well, it's yet another reason to attract the attention of email developers. All the basic standards have been developed about a couple of years ago. But so far there have been no services, even though the entire industry is looking forward to Cyrillic email. Use your microphone, please. Please identify yourself and fire off with your question. I'm a Professor Strahov. Professor is my nickname. My question is about children and self-regulation. Do you have a mechanism to regulate people's behavior in the children's internet domain? Passive or active toolkit? Well, of course we have tools to steward and police. Steward, police, and manage disputes. Yes, of course. Elena Chiniak, an investment company. Do you see any risks from the US sanctions upon new GTLDs? What are the risks? Could you please reiterate? Yes, sanctions. Okay, understood. So far, I cannot see any risks whatsoever. ICANN functionality works even though some countries are under United Nations sanctions, not just unilateral US sanctions. This is a hypothetical question. I've got to deal with specific examples in order to give you an answer. So far they're not going to shut down anyone. Other questions, please? Evgeny Korzhov, Computer World. I have a question to Yury on new services. 4 times he said that new services are important. And I think you have already got something, so can you share with us something new that would really look into the tomorrow's convergent world? IP telephony. IP telephony, for instance. A question from the online world? All right. Alexei, fire off. Pavel Grad. Will there be a protection against cyber squatters in RF after the sunrise period? Well, maybe that question has come just that little bit late. I think we have already talked about this. On .rf, they've gone live already, so I will just add one point. All new domains have the same rules as GTLDs, and there is a prejudicial dispute settlement procedure. In Moscow, we have planned for a long time to create an arbitrage center. Maybe this will create a simpler procedure which will make life not more difficult for cyber squatters because they are also our customers, but which will raise the awareness of rights holders and copyright owners. For GTLDs and for CCTLDs, the rules are the same. Several courts and several dispute settlement committees have ruled against right owners who have not registered the same names in .rf if they had in .ru. Well, there are certain examples in .guru. There was someone who registered the IBM.guru domain, and this domain redirected to IBM.com. With the new procedure that is in place, their domain was revoked in just 5 days, so they lost money. I know that MOSCVA Moscow also has such rules, so there will be a tool. We just have only 5 minutes, so Fyodor, what can you say? Well, these methods are all the same for all GTLDs: sunrise period, priority registration, fast response procedure, which is new for new GTLDs, and some policies within the domain. In our case, we'll have a bona fide usage policy, which will always track the honoring of certain values. So there are certain mechanisms that they have always been there. All right, another 2 minutes, okay? Just one question. We will protract. We will extend this meeting for another 2 minutes, but with your permission, I will be managing questions. I'm very sorry. I'm very sorry. I'm Fake Armanov for .az. Yury, you're the most popular person here. We are planning IDN for our domain. Very recently, I looked at the Russian stop list of Russian websites, and I knew, and I thought I speak good Russian. So with .ukur use also blacklists and stop lists. Well, we already have a stop list. It contains 2 parts. These are domain names which will never be registered. This is an open list. However, when we went to the Ukrainian Academy of Sciences, to the Linguistic Institute, its director, Shirokov, said, well, it's no use, because our people are really creative, and they will think of something, and in 2 minutes, he thought of 2 domain names which are not blacklisted, but which are absolutely inappropriate. So we have created a closed blacklist which contains parts of the words that will never be used in domain names. This is our know-how, but we will share it with our colleagues. Well, that would be really interesting. That will be really interesting to see whether Ukrainian parts of words are the same as Russian. My question is to Veni Markovski. On this BCG report that you've shown us, do they have a full version of the report where they would have IT skills? They don't have a percentage of messages in the local language, and the percentage of websites in the local language, they would raise us a little bit up from German. When you say you, who do you mean? Well, you represent ICANN. I am not Boston Consulting Group. Well, ICANN sponsored the work. Maxim, it is a question, of course, not to Veni. Anna Karahanyan, Armenian Internet Society. I have a question to Irina. Do you have a government program? Because children spend most of their time in kindergartens or in schools. So, for instance, do you have a government program for Moscow schools, to start with Moscow? In Armenia, we have such a government program for rural educational establishments and for rural administrations. The government program to connect Russian schools physically to the internet has been implemented already. As to domains and school-specific websites, there is no centralized program to do that, even though we do hope that some pilot projects will be implemented in the near future. Not to make it compulsory, of course, but to propose a standardized solution that would be economically viable as well. The question is off the microphone. So we would like this to happen, certainly. Thank you, thank you. And this will be the last question, and we will end at this. I have a question on IP telephony and city-centric domains. This is the text message that I've got just now. Transactions on your banking card are blocked. Please text there. So how are you going to fight this? Well, I don't think this is the question that should be asked here, probably in the neighboring room. So I'd like to thank our panelists. I'd like to thank the audience. Very unexpectedly, you were very receptive and very proactive. All right, thanks very much. Let's wish all success to the Russian new domains and to our Ukrainian colleagues. Thanks to everyone. Now we will have a break.